Hey, good afternoon, world. It is April 13th, 2022. It looks like it's about 2 o'clock my time. Look, happy Pesach to all my Jewish friends and happy Easter to all my Christian friends. I think that this time of year is by far my favorite. I always love spring just by the feel of warm weather in the air, but also, spiritually and everything that this season means to me is definitely a premise of my existence and pretty much the reason I do what I do. And so, look, it's the 13th, right? 13th is a big number in my life. It has some intersection and some revelatory sort of, I should say, relevance to the era and what it is that I'm trying to connect with you about. But I guess the first things that I want to say is, look, I continue to deliver the truth to you. 4+ million views more than existed maybe 8 weeks ago are aware of who I am. But, in the context of like 3-minute increments on TikTok, it's not in full bloom or in context, but we're getting more and more people from around the country, many of whom are reaching out to me, many of whom are saying, look, man, we went through this whole thing years ago and now they're discovering what it is that we put forth. And they're asking me questions like, where have you been? And how did this happen? And why is this silent? Those are very important questions. And then also I've had other people like farmers, literally farmers from the Midwest, reach out to me and say, oh my God, we discovered you on TikTok. And now suddenly they're realizing what it is that they're going through right now, as it turns out to be another version of the kind that took place pretty much post 2016 forward for a lot of farms and set up through predatory lending and all sorts of deceptive acts and practices that are literally stealing farms that are worth millions upon millions of dollars because people don't understand how the system works. Now, meanwhile, again, we're under just this cacophony of noise and sound and madness and literally people that seem smart and entertaining that we want to listen to, that millions do listen to, do not have a freaking clue what the system is or how it works or how it functions. And so that's why I'm truth bombing the con. And I got to do it within the context of the season, which is extremely important to me and probably the most important time on the calendar year. But, in terms of the whole context of everything, the time is now. And I've got to try to capture the essence, the spirit of all of you who are paying more attention than ever before, but it's still just a drop in the bucket of what we need to create. So I encourage anybody who wants to know all of my, let's call them sermons. They're not sermons on the mount, but they're my sermons really of trying to create this connection to you to make you understand what exactly happened to our country and why you, the citizen, has to wake up. Otherwise, it's just another disaster after another disaster after another disaster, and we're run by a criminal enterprise. Okay, it's all smoke and mirrors, it's all corruption, and it's pulled off the largest criminal conspiracy and cover-up in history that never ended because you do not understand how it works, and I'm desperately trying to turn you onto it, especially the millions of you, the tens of millions of you that have already been buried by this monstrosity, not to mention those that have absolutely no idea what's going on, as your life got destroyed, as you went through a divorce, as you maybe contemplated suicide, maybe someone close to you did. I mean, all of these things, in addition to homelessness and a lot of other just absolutely massive calamity are the consequence of this situation that nobody understands. Okay, so here it goes, and I hope I can get you to really pay attention, and then I hope you can become someone that joins this movement to purge corruption. So I've been hashtagging 4 different major sort of initiatives. Okay, and it starts with hashtag Exodus. Again, happy Pesach to my Jewish friends. The celebration of the 4 questions of Moses, of Exodus, of liberation from Pharaoh and bondage, and everything that means. It's an incredibly important story to me because why? Because it's the story of our times and what we're living through, and it's been something I've been aware of my entire life, but not to the level that I had to go experience this myself, and actually my entire being got turned inside out, upside down from having to put the pieces of the puzzle together to be able to put this on a platinum platter for us all to comprehend. So the spirit of Exodus, of course, is liberation. Liberation from bondage. And the reason we celebrate Passover is because it leads to rebirth, right? Renewal. Again, you got to understand where you came from to know where you're going. The whole idea of the Israelites and Exodus from Pharaoh's bondage out of slavery into the promised land, the whole notion biblically through scripture and parable and all of the rest of it is the notion that, well, if you're going to have a society function, it has to function by the law. Or in the case of the Ten Commandments, God's law. But what are the Ten Commandments? Really, it's a lot of common sense, right? Aside from you shall not worship any other God but me, and pretty much the first four commandments, you get into the common sense sort of parables, right? Thou shalt not kill. Thou shalt not steal. Thou shalt not disrespect thy parents. Thou shalt not covet thy wife. Thou shalt not actually engage in fraudulent business practices. I mean, that's literally the way I interpret the last commandment, and it seems to be what the whole it's just the essence of what these laws are about is don't lie, steal, and cheat. Common sense, right? And the idea is, okay, well, you live by God's law, then you can go to the promised land. And what a great epic odyssey, and it's something that I've taught my son and I relive every single Passover, and it's such a beautiful, freeing, but yet this really super sort of motivating force that God is on the side of righteousness, right? I mean, that's what we've got to believe. It's got to be that. God has to be on the side of right? Otherwise, what's the point? But anyway, that leads us to hashtag the resurrection. So look, the hashtag the resurrection, again, it has a very similar theme, liberation, right? I mean, the way I understand Jesus and the nature of pretty much the whole ideology to lift up the downtrodden and to purge what seemed to be the wickedness, which to me I interpret as corruption, which is a lot of the times configured in the story of power. And the only way that Jesus could get that message through was through great sacrifice, which then, of course, when he is resurrected, he's liberated to eternity, right? Based on living the golden rule and the good life. And the one that is predicated, I think, of the Ten Commandments and, of course, Exodus and this continuation, of course, to resurrection. Both of them are very, very important. And that's the theme of what it is that I am trying desperately to connect with millions upon millions of you. And everybody's got a different story. Everybody's got a different experience. But there's more of us now today, after 13 years after the 2008 great financial crisis, that can relate to the idea that, A, you had your life set up and turned upside down because you didn't understand you were set up in a criminal enterprise, and you didn't understand that the courts of this country were going to ignore the criminal enterprise because it's our financial system. And beyond that, you don't even know how our financial system operates. So I'm just going to put that off to the side for the moment, right? But sticking with the theme of Exodus and the resurrection, and 'tis the season. It's reboot, it's rebirth, it's renewal. It's to purge that which is holding us back, which is what we have to do in unison with millions and millions and millions of people. My next hashtag in the whole odyssey is hashtag truth is marching. So quite frankly, staying with the theme in terms of, let's say, the modern era, which of course I'm including going back to, let's just say, the birth of the United States, I'm referring to in this particular hashtag, the victory over slavery once again. But this time by the North in the United States, Abraham Lincoln, the Union to purge slavery in the South. It's basically Exodus. Now, in this case, it's for African-American slaves, not the Jews, not all of the other people that have been slaves. But in this particular case, after 400 years of potentially slavery, ironically, that's what it says in the Old Testament about how long the Israelites were under the thumb of bondage. But, the Civil War was one a great sacrifice. The amount of blood that was spilt on the battlefields to purge slavery is beyond our wildest imaginations. the sacrifice of the North at that time for all the different reasons. And a lot of people want to argue that, the Civil War wasn't necessarily about, breaking the bonds of slavery or bondage, that they were about a whole bunch of different, no, it was about breaking the bonds of slavery. That's what the Civil War was. I'm sorry, it was. So in our effort to move the needle and to move forward, you've got to translate how these things, what they mean to you. Exodus, the resurrection, truth is marching. And then the last one that I've been putting in sequence to all of these is one that's personally important to me, called #failure is not an option. So that comes from the mission of Apollo 13. Coincidentally, James Lovell, Captain James Lovell, just happens to have the same last name that I do. It just happened to be Apollo 13. And the entire story of that was that capable, incredibly intelligent astronauts that had the right stuff, because of the training and all the things that they do to become what they were able to configure really a miracle by taking different elements of the space capsule to reconfigure them to be able to get them to safely go through the correct trajectory to enter the Earth's atmosphere. Otherwise, they would have been bounced out in space, never to be seen or heard from again. And if they didn't get all of the right elements in play to reconfigure the way the system worked within the capsule, then they would have run out of oxygen, or it would have burned up the astronauts on the inside. So within the continuity of this theme, again, great courage, great integrity, great pursuit of the truth in all of these particular situations to rise above the madness for renewal, for redemption, for, quite frankly, glory. Okay? Regardless of what your spirituality is, or your religious persuasion, or what you think you believe in, or anything else, I hope that most of us, and I know not all of us, quite frankly, because there's a whole lot of us that are completely diabolical liars that feed off of this freaking mechanism that none of the rest of us are aware of, that have basically been profiting and destroying the rest of us, without any pushback. What I've seen throughout my journey is that what I've learned is that, look, the Odyssey of whether it's the Pharaohs or, King George III and the monarchies, or, the South and the Confederacy and the plantation owners, you see a theme? You see some similarities of how all of these different structures operate? Well, yeah, it's autocracy. It's like top down. It's complicity, right? In a system that, basically transfers the power upwards, as opposed to the demos, democracy, rising tide raises all ships, dynamism, that everybody has a shot, life, liberty, and the justice and pursuit of happiness and all of those sorts of things, where no man is above the law. That's what we're supposed to be, but that's not what we are, because the Pharaohs, King George III, monarchies, dictators, autocracies, Confederacy, that's all the same configuration. And so when you have Exodus, when you have the resurrection, when you have truth is marching, when you have failure is not an option, all of those things in its continuity are literally the magic of the right stuff to move forward, right? And to live just, i.e. the meaning of justice, right? So it's the 13th, and I'll bring this full circle, okay? So look, man, I for some reason back in, I want to say 1998, maybe it was like 1995 to 1998, 13 just started popping up on my radar. Like, I was living in Los Angeles at the time. I was working for some heavy hitter executive producers, and I had to get to meetings on time. I had to do this and that. And for some reason, 13 just started popping up on my radar. I don't know if you've ever had that experience where something pops up on your radar and you kind of think, well, wait a second, I should be paying attention to that because I can't avoid it. So that was the thing for me in 13, right? And so I started looking all of this up and trying to understand if there's anything I should know about the number 13 that I could actually understand. And I started digging deep. And this is really extraordinary given where I'm at this stage of the game. So 13, as I start to learn, I mean, I always, like everybody else, I knew Friday the 13th bad, bad mojo, bad luck, that sort of thing. But I tried to find out exactly what it was all about. And so, as my, just very surface level research led me, and it was just more of kind of a passing interest than anything else. But I learned that the Knights Templars had, been on part of the Crusades in Jerusalem, and somehow they manifested some sort of divine understanding of things that we're able to take them to the next level as it relates to something I'm going to unfold on you. But interestingly enough, supposedly, as myth would have it, they got these answers apparently at Solomon's Temple during the Crusades, which is where the Ark of the Covenant was supposedly parked. Okay, again, mythology, whatever, kind of fun, whatever. I don't put a whole lot of faith in this, except I will tell you that my favorite movie of all time, not surprisingly, is Indiana Jones: Raiders of the Lost Ark. Right? And you can learn a lot from that movie. In fact, I've learned and translated so much from that movie because everything that I'm trying to tell you is basically, symbolized in this one moment in that film where Indiana Jones is trying to find out where the Ark of the Covenant is. And he and Salah, the great Egyptian digger, and then, of course, this mystic, Egyptian mystic, have this staff of Ra, in which it has the exact coordinates of where the Ark of the Covenant is hidden. And so as Indiana Jones and Salah are discovering this, they realize that there's instructions on the front of the staff and then on the back. And as it turns out, the Nazis only had the staff with one side of the information. But that's important from this perspective, because one, in the movie and in the analogy, it gave Indiana Jones the opportunity to get a leg up and get a chance to get to the Ark before the Nazis did, even though if you know that movie, I've said it 100 times, you know what happens. But the long and the short of it is asymmetric information is exactly what undergirds everything that took place to create the largest criminal conspiracy and cover-up in history that never ended, that nobody understands. Because you only have one half of the piece of the information. So I'll just drop this truth bomb in the middle of all this thing. You do not live in a country where supply and demand is the function of our economy. You do not live in a country where the integrity of law, where no man is above the law, actually happens. The convergence of those two things are about what I'm going to lay out, okay? And it's all, the answers are all in the con, www.thecon.tv. But getting back to my sermon, as it were, in 13. So I start to discover that the Knights Templars get this information that I'm about to lay on you because of the Crusades at Solomon's Temple, where supposedly that's where the Ark of the Covenant is, and they came back to Western Europe. And we're talking about the 1400s now, right? And so they started to devise their own lending system, okay? They started to devise something that might be constituted as kind of an early banking system or an independent banking system that was outside the rule of the King of France at the time. And the King of France was, of course, one side of the coin of power with the Pope. And that's what we call the Holy Roman Empire. So the reason we get to bad luck on Friday the 13th was because on Friday the 13th, 1407, the Pope and the King of France conspired to do a sneak attack on the Knights Templars because they were fearful that the Knights Templars were going to become competition and take away their power. Quite frankly, and I haven't thought about this before until just now, very similar to the whole notion of the firstborn Israelites and why the Pharaoh had them murdered, because he didn't want the slaves to rise up and compete and take over control, right? So Pharaoh, in the parables and the scriptures, obviously murders the firstborn of Israel, which of course in the 10 plagues comes back to haunt him in a big way, right? But going back to the Friday the 13th and the bad luck, they basically murdered, I can't remember, I think it was like somewhere in the 1200 range of these Knights Templars that had come back. But somehow, some way, and that's why we get Friday the 13th, but somehow, some way that group of people somehow survived, managed to survive, get out of the reach of the Crown's army and the Pope's army. I think it was the Crown's army, but with the consent of the Pope, they were able to manage to get around that. And somehow they started from that point forward creating these guilds, and these guilds were built of what they called Masons. And the Masons were the guys that were building the epic churches, the Gothic churches, in these cities, and they were, supposedly, Scottish Rite stonemasons. I mean, that's part of the whole mythology of it. Just again, don't take me like this is gospel. This is just more of kind of a fun way to kind of intercede like my journey, quite frankly, to what it is that I'm trying to get you to completely absorb. So a fascinating parallel, right? So the guilds, came to be. They were the working class, but they were architects. They were these genius, engineers that could build these just fantastic structures, and they start popping up all over Western Europe, of course, because of the ones who built during, I think it's part and parcel to the Renaissance. It was in this time period, and of course, there was a lot of great advances in science and so forth, and it was back and forth between the Catholic Church, burning at the stake, some of the greatest scientists that existed during that time, or in history, for that matter. But as things start to evolve, those I guess Masons evolved into the United States. It had a major influence into the guys that are our founding fathers, George Washington and Benjamin Franklin and Thomas Jefferson and so forth. Apparently, they were all Masons, okay, Freemasons, and that was an evolution of this. And interestingly enough, there were 13 colonies in the original, colonies that rose as unison in one to rebel and create the revolution, the American Revolution, the shot heard around the world, right? And again, 13 is a corollary, interestingly enough, and this always blew my mind, that, and you can kind of understand why, and I never really fully understood if this was factual or just coincident and everything else, but if you look at the dollar bill, there's 13 levels of the pyramid going up to the all-seeing eye. If you look at the eagle, he has talons, and he's gripping 13 quivers, the arrows, in one of his talons, and I think on the other side, there was 13 stars for the colonies. And, the symbolism is all over the place, which is really interesting. And so I kind of found that out a long time ago, and I found that to be an interesting parable to something that was important to me in terms of Exodus and justice that, of course, leads to resurrection. And, as it goes further into the American Revolution and everything else, the nature of, I'm trying to think of where I left off on that, the 13. So, I know. The baseline of it all is that I was doing this investigation, and I started to discover that 13 has three major definitions that are just the opposite of the mythicism of the bad luck of Friday the 13th. 13th in Judaism, based on one of its ancient philosophers, is a guy by the name of Maimonides, and they created the 13 principles of God, which undergirded a big part of what constituted Judaism. And the other side of it is that 13 apparently means balance in the universe. There's like this celestial sort of like always this balance between orbiting planets and the sun and that sort of thing. And 13 has this sort of significance in terms of balance. Again, this is all kind of mythology stuff, kind of fun. Don't act like don't misinterpret that I'm acting like this is something that I want you to hang on to as gospel, because I don't. It's just interesting parables in terms of the actual theme of what it is that drives me so hard. And then the third aspect of 13 that I always found very amazing is that it means revolution. Okay, so let's hit the rewind button here for a second, right? So just out of the blue, 13 pops up on all of my radar back in the early 90s, long before I ever experienced what the hell I would go through to ultimately make this documentary called The Con, and ultimately, how 13 kind of plays out in my life. And today's the 13th, and it's Passover, and Easter's just around the corner. So again, Ark of the Covenant, right? To Solomon's temples, to the Knights Templars, to this knowledge that Friday the 13th had, to the Masons, and then ultimately the Freemasons in the 13th colony, in the context of the principles of God, balance in the universe, and of course, revolution. Okay? Mind-blowing to me. Absolutely mind-blowing to me when I kind of put all that stuff together. I mean, maybe you can find what you're looking for, and maybe that what I'm saying actually doesn't have any real validity, but it's the way I've read this whole thing, throughout. And I always thought that was interesting, and that was before I ended up having to go through this insane sort of journey, odyssey, that I'm still in the midst of. But interestingly enough, this was my 13th year of the beginning of when I actually had to, my life was destroyed, turned upside down, and this system of rotten, diabolical behavior of this power structure that nobody can see, that nobody understands, or the pharaohs, or the kings, or the autocrats, or the dictators, or the plantation owners, and everything that constitutes. That, again, freedom and liberty and justice for all is what drives me, and that's always been me, right? My entire life. That's what's driven me. That's who I am. And so ultimately, when the world drops on my head in 2008, and I start pulling on the threads, and I go on this insane 13-year journey. What do I end up doing? Well, my team and I discovered all of the answers to the largest criminal conspiracy and cover-up in history that never ended. That's our system. And what's our system? Well, our system is a system of deception. Okay? Why? Why is our system a system of deception? So let me give you some real stuff versus what the deception became. So World War II was real. D-Day was real. Destroying the Nazis was real. We lost over close to 1 million troops. I can't remember what the full numbers are in terms of those lost in combat and everything else. But let's just say kind of roughly over 1 million troops. Interestingly enough, the Soviet Union lost like 22 million, just so you understand that part of it. But we had great sacrifice in blood and treasure that went into defeating fascism, right? Defeating Hitler. And again, once again, creating the opportunity for liberty and justice for all to really prevail throughout the world. That was our contribution during World War II, which was very real. A lot of people died fighting for that and suffered and put it all on the line to make sure that the next 50 to 70 years worked out the way it did, in a way that we could have basically a growing middle class, where we could have home ownership, where we could have safety and dignity for our families, to where we could create, education, and we could create balance and all of those things, and all of which only came from a system that actually functions of, by, and for the people, not of, by, and for the oligarchs or the pharaohs or the slave plantation owners, okay? So what we show in the con, by the way, is by the time you get to 1998, thanks to the Clinton administration, who actually got there thanks to what the Reagan administration had done before it, and quite frankly, the Jimmy Carter administration before that, and Bush definitely played his role in it. But the big stuff happened, I think, if you want to put your finger on it, during the Clinton administration, when they got rid of all the laws that we put into existence after the Great Depression. Because we learned all the problems that created the Great Depression. We figured it out, and we used to be the United States of, by, and for the people that could problem solve like nobody else on earth. Again, going to my failure is not an option corollary, right? Because what did those astronauts do? Once again, Apollo 13, just to remind you, and my last name is Lovell, James Lovell. But that's aside the point. The point is that they could figure out how to work themselves out of a jam, because that's what Americans are. When you have the capacity to do right and you can make things work, you can figure out problems because you can see it for what it is. You're not lost in translation. You're not like the populations that followed Hitler, or quite frankly Stalin, many of whom, millions and millions and millions of them, died brutally because we're not suckers. You remember, Bugs Bunny? What's up, Doc? I mean, I'm serious. That's part of our cultural sort of, history, not to mention Popeye, freaking uppercut to Bluto. I mean, come on, people. The United States is supposed to be about courage, premised on life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, premised on the integrity of law. And when you have the integrity of law, what that means in the entire premise of the United States is you don't trust absolute power. You don't trust the oligarchs. You don't trust the pharaohs. You don't trust the king. You don't trust the dictator. We have democracy of, by, and for the people, and the way it's supposed to balance is you're supposed to have separation of powers. You're supposed to have a judiciary that's independent. You're supposed to have a legislative and a congressional administrative branch that's independent, not to mention the executive branch, right? So all of these things are no longer. That's the con. And how is that the con? Going back to the idea of what I talked about, supply and demand, right? You don't have supply and demand. You got cocaine that comes out of the Federal Reserve that fuels rich people's assets. That's what we've been doing since 2012 to prop up the world, while most of us have been hanging on by our fingertips or got destroyed by the system or continuing to get destroyed by the system. And the reason that happens is because of corruption. But it's not just corruption of the body politic. It's corruption of our soul. It's corruption of cowards that can't get out of their own way because they're just wanting to be victims. You can't be a victim anymore. You've got to join Exodus. You've got to join Exodus if you want to get to resurrection. That's my message on the 13th day of April, 2022. Why? Because these are the answers. It's really simple. When you have theft, deception, thievery, these are crimes, okay? You don't need to know all the different crimes that the financial industry got away with. You just need to understand that they got away with these crimes. And if you want to know the details, you watch the con. And believe it or not, there's actually more than what's in the con. I've got Con Season 2. I've got this and that. I'm trying to talk to all of the people to make this thing happen. Meanwhile, I'm watching a wonderful Jewish attorney in Miami today literally fight the entirety of corruption in the courts. His name is Bruce Jacobs. It was one of the most brilliant displays of courage I have ever seen from the perspective of most professionals in the law profession have not gone to where Bruce did today, specifically because when you're in the bar, you got to kind of play by the rules. You got to be polite. You got to be professional. It's not polite to call the court corrupt or impugn its integrity, as Bruce actually supposedly did, and that's why his career is nearly over for doing the right thing. I know because I have the evidence of literally thousands upon thousands upon thousands of documentation fraud that were the same type of documentation fraud that happened throughout the entire country that led to millions of illegal foreclosures that were set up on a criminal enterprise that gave trillions of dollars to the freaking hyenas that lied their way to trillions of dollars of the upside, which we thought was, what, supply and demand? Okay, there's a sucker born every minute, right? Okay, but this is different than seeing the lady with the beard or, the guy with 3 eyes at the circus with P.T. Barnum, right? But I'll tell you, one of the two biggest along those lines, and this gets me every time, right? So I heard decades ago that Lyndon Baines Johnson said, if you can convince the lowest rung white man that he is higher than the highest rung black man, you can pick his pockets all day. When I heard that, I was like, you've got to be kidding me, because everything that we show in the con starts with predating on African Americans, particularly widows, the most vulnerable, who had equity in their houses, who had to fight through more than you and I could ever imagine, and probably as much as those Marines that went and stormed the beaches of D-Day in a slightly different way, escaping Jim Crow and coming through this process to get their piece of home ownership. Those people were targeted because they're not particularly sophisticated as it relates to financial products and real estate and those sorts of things. Does that mean they're dumb? No. It's because it's called asymmetric information. You know what you know. You remember when I was talking about the whole piece of the information with Indiana Jones looking for the lost ark? If you get half the story, you're not going to get the whole story. That's what the con is. It's the whole story. And so what we're in the midst of right now is we've got liar after liar after liar in power. So it's the Wall Street meritocracy, 4 decades long of neoliberalism through the Ivy League sect that have completely controlled and dominated the system for a long time, and many people regard them as the deep state. They're not wrong. They are. They are the state. They're the ones who write the laws. They're the one who administer it because they're the smartest amongst us, but unfortunately, they're doing it for themselves, and shame on them, especially the ones who know what I'm saying is true because of what Bastiat said a long time ago, the 17th century philosopher that was, in 17th century France before the revolution, when he said, when a group of men discover plunder, they create a legal code to authorize it and a moral code to glorify it. Sick. That's corruption. So the stuff from the Pharaohs all the way through now, it's the same as it ever been, and it's history repeating itself. It's asymmetric of information. Why are the evil people so much more motivated than good people? Why are they so much more clever? How can they pull the world over your eyes? Why do you sit on your hands? But here I am. I'm a brawler. I'm a competitor, man. I always have been. And quite frankly, it probably won't surprise you. I played both quarterback and outside linebacker. I ended up being better at outside linebacker, and that's how I see the world. I'm like, if someone's making a move and busting something on me, I'm right there. That's what I do. Okay, I played rugby and all sorts of other things, and I've gotten in a lot of fistfights in my life. I don't anymore. I'm well beyond that as a 50-year-old man, that middle age. You don't do that anymore, but I'm telling you, that's been my mindset most of my life, right? So when it comes to battling bad people, it's what I do. I don't know why God made me this way, or the universe, or my experience, or just my personality. I don't know what it's all about, honestly. But it's what I feel, and it's what I do. And so to try to bring it to conclusion, if I may, and I know I kind of carried on a little bit here, but it's important, This season is about rebirth. It's about renewal. But you can't be renewed unless you purge what you got to leave behind. And what we've got to leave behind as a culture is we've got to purge the corruption. Because at the end of the day, it's not supply and demand. It's not the integrity of law. And so if it's not that, and we're not the United States, then what are we? Well, everything I've already played out this whole time. And so if you celebrate honestly, and this is to, if you celebrate Passover and you have the nerve to ask the 4 questions and to, talk about Moses in the spiritual sense and really recline and all of those things that we're supposed to learn from Exodus, and yet you're involved with lying, stealing, and cheating? Really? What about if you believe in resurrection and you believe that God is going to like elevate you and you live the good life, right? And you have to sacrifice this life and everything else, and you got to go through literally the sacrifice to get into eternal bliss, or however we want to think about that. And you think God's going to let you there if you're a liar? Really? Well, then you don't believe in God. And I trust me, I struggle with God, the notion of God all the time. I don't struggle with the notion of the power of nature and the infinity and the brilliance of it all that's God-like. And I don't know if it's a guy with a long beard with a big staff that's overlooking us in a benevolent way, or maybe it's yin and yang and all that. Dude, the one thing about being middle-aged that's beautiful is that I've been able to see and discover and understand and kind of think about all of these different things in a way that I learn every single day. I don't have all the answers. Am I doing a sermon? What was it? The Sermon from the Mount? Do I walk on water? No. Am I Moses? Am I Jesus? No. I'm Patrick Lovell. Onwards and upwards.